The mountain cowboy had promised Judith freedom when spring came, so why was she terrified of the day the snow finally melted? A rifle shot cracked through the blizzard. Judith gripped the cabin door as wind drove ice against her face. Zeke had vanished beyond the pines, and now his rifle had gone silent. She reached for the weapon beside the hearth. What was waiting for her in that storm? Tell me where you're watching from. Before dawn, frost silvered every fence rail on the Yoder place. Judith crossed the yard with a feed bucket against her hip, boots breaking the thin crust over yesterday's mud. Smoke was already rising from neighboring chimneys, straight at first, then bending east when the wind came down from the mountains. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, filled the wood box beside the kitchen stove. Then she carried her father's hammer to the shed door and worked on the loose hinge he had once promised to fix before winter. He had been gone 3 years, her mother nearly 4. Still, pieces of them remained everywhere. Her mother's breadboard leaned beside the pantry shelf, worn pale where thousands of loaves had been kneaded. Her father's sharpening stone rested on the workbench. A German Bible sat beside the lamp. In the kitchen drawer were seed packets covered in her mother's narrow handwriting. Nothing in the house looked abandoned. Yet lately Judith had begun to feel like a visitor in it. The meeting house bell rang just after sunrise. Not the Sunday rhythm, one slow toll, then another. Judith stopped with the hammer in her hand. She already knew. Inside the meeting house, Bishop Stoltzfus sat with 4 elders at a plain wooden table. Sister Martha occupied a chair against the wall, hands folded beneath her black shawl. No one raised his voice. That made what followed harder to bear. Judith, Bishop Stoltzfus began, your parents' household cannot remain separate forever. There are taxes, seed accounts, livestock obligations, matters that were meant to pass into another family household. Judith stood before them with her hands folded over her apron. I have managed those obligations. We know. Then what is the trouble? One elder looked down. Bishop Stoltzfus took a slow breath. You are 28. Judith waited. No marriage has been arranged. Not for lack of discussion, another elder added, then regretted saying it. Judith looked at him. He cleared his throat. Some families believed you were too strong-minded for a quiet household. The words were carefully chosen. She had heard the less careful versions. Too broad, too heavy, too much woman for a man wanting obedience and little trouble. Judith's fingers tightened around each other. Bishop Stoltzfus continued. There is work available in Helena. A charitable labor agent has connections there, kitchens, laundry, household service. What is his name? The elders exchanged a glance. Judith saw it. What would I earn? No answer came quickly enough. What house would I be working in? Again, hesitation. Then Bishop Stoltzfus said, those details would be arranged when you arrived. A coldness settled in her stomach. And the money he sent? Sister Martha's head lifted slightly. Bishop Stoltzfus frowned. You heard about that? So there was money. An advance, travel, lodging, placement costs. Judith stared at him. Did I agree to any of this? The clock on the wall ticked. No one moved. Finally, Bishop Stoltzfus said, we believed it was best. Judith looked down at her hands. Those hands had planted the south field after her father's lungs failed. They had pulled a calf through a difficult birth at midnight. They had cooked at weddings, washed bodies for burial, mended neighbors' clothes without charging when times were lean. She looked up. Best for whom? No one answered. Judith walked until the last farmhouse disappeared behind her. Beyond the settlement fence, cultivated fields gave way to dark pines. The sky hung low and gray, promising snow. A horse moved somewhere among the trees. Judith stopped. A tall man emerged leading a roan gelding, Ezekiel Thorne. Everyone knew him. The mountain cowboy who came down several times a year with hides, smoked venison, horses needing shoeing, and stories from country no one else cared to enter in winter. His buckskin coat was dark from old weather. Snow clung to his beard. Judith stiffened. If you came to pity me, don't. Zeke's eyes rested on her. Good. Pity isn't much use in January. Despite herself, she looked at him. He nodded toward the settlement. I heard enough. Then you heard more than you had a right to. Probably. He did not apologize. That irritated her. It also made her listen. My place gets difficult in winter, he said. I can handle it alone, have before, but two capable people can do more than one. Judith frowned. What are you offering? A room, food, a share of what the place produces. For what? Work you already know how to do. Livestock, food stores, stove, sick animals, anything else we divide between us. She studied him carefully. And when winter ends? Zeke's answer came without hesitation. Stay until spring. When the roads open, I'll take you wherever you choose. Helena. Another town. Back here. Her throat tightened. And what would I owe you? His expression changed then. Not softer exactly. More serious. Nothing you don't choose to give. Judith looked toward the settlement roofs beyond the fields. You could be another man deciding what happens to me. Yes. The answer surprised her. Zeke gathered the reins. So don't decide today. He mounted and rode away. He left no demand behind him. Only a choice. That evening, Sister Martha came carrying a loaf wrapped in linen. Once the door was shut, she unfolded the cloth. Inside was a copied ledger line, a payment from Helena, several weeks old. Judith read the amount twice. That's more than stage fare. I know, Martha whispered. I asked what it covered. Nobody gave me the same answer. Judith moved to the window. Far down the road, beyond the bare orchard, a rider sat motionless against the snow-dark fields. A moment later, the horse turned and disappeared. Before sunrise, Judith packed 2 dresses, stockings, sewing things, her Bible, 1 photograph, and her mother's breadboard. Zeke's wagon arrived while frost still covered the yard. Bishop Stoltzfus came out before Judith reached the gate. You cannot simply take responsibility for her. Zeke stepped down from the wagon. I'm not. The bishop frowned. Zeke looked at Judith. Ask her. Every face turned toward her. Nobody had asked her the day before. Judith lifted her bag into the wagon. I'm going. The wheels had barely reached the main road when Samuel, the stonemason's son, came running from between 2 barns. He had mocked her when they were younger. Now he could hardly meet her eyes. Judith. Zeke stopped the horses. Samuel swallowed. I heard the Helena man talking when he thought nobody was close. Judith waited. He said he'd already paid for delivery. Her fingers went cold. Delivery of what? Samuel finally looked at her. You. For several seconds, nobody moved. The roan shifted in its traces, leather creaking softly in the cold. Judith stared at Samuel as though one more word might make his meaning less terrible. Zeke spoke first. Who said it? The Helena man. I heard him behind the smithy maybe 3 weeks ago. Samuel swallowed. He was talking to one of the elders. I thought he meant supplies then. And now? Judith asked. Samuel's eyes dropped to the wagon. Now I don't. Judith looked back toward the settlement. Bishop Stoltzfus stood far behind them, a dark figure near the meeting house. She could go back and demand answers, but yesterday she had demanded them. Nobody had given her any. Judith turned forward. Drive. Zeke studied her face, then flicked the reins. The settlement slowly disappeared behind them. By noon, the wagon road had narrowed beneath tall pines. Snow lay deeper there, untouched except for deer tracks and the occasional print of a fox. The mountains ahead seemed to rise straight into the clouds. Judith kept one hand tight around the edge of the seat. Zeke noticed. Trading post is about 4 hours south of my place. She glanced at him. Nearest cattle outfit is 2 hours in decent weather. Trail back down is marked with red cuts on the pines. 2 cuts mean you're headed toward the valley. Judith understood what I was doing. He wasn't telling her she was safe. He was telling her how to leave. Her hand loosened. Near sundown, they crossed a frozen creek and climbed one final ridge. The Thorne homestead appeared below them. A heavy log cabin stood against the timber, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Beyond it were a lean-to stable, a cattle shelter, woodshed, smokehouse, root cellar, and fenced paddock. Nothing was fancy. Everything looked built to survive. Zeke stopped beside the porch. Home for the winter, if you still want it. If. Judith climbed down. Inside, warmth from the iron stove met her face. She expected one open room and perhaps a loft. Instead, Zeke opened a door beside the kitchen. There was a bed, washstand, small chest, peg rail, and thick quilt. Then Judith noticed the latch. It fastened from inside. Zeke set a small key on the table. "That's yours." She touched it with one finger. "You prepared this before asking me?" "Fixed the room last fall. Never had much use for it." He walked away before the gesture could become something she owed him for. At supper, Judith automatically reached for the smallest slice of bread. Zeke noticed. He placed another beside it. Her shoulders tightened. "There's more in the oven," he said. "I don't need 2. "All right." He started eating. Judith stared at the bread. After a while, she said, "People notice how much a woman my size eats." Zeke stopped chewing. His gaze moved from her face to the loaf and back. Then he pushed the bread basket within easier reach. "People down there must have a powerful amount of spare time." Judith nearly smiled. Nearly. The days found their own rhythm. She discovered damp potatoes in the root cellar before rot could spread. She patched a grain sack mice had reached and stuffed wool into a draft along the north wall. Zeke showed her how to tie snowshoes and read the sky when a storm was building behind the western ridge. He showed her the red trail marks. He taught her the safe handling of the spare rifle kept above the mantel. Not because he expected trouble, but because, as he put it, nobody living this far from town ought to depend on somebody else being home. One morning, they moved a feed barrel. Judith stepped aside when Zeke approached. He stopped. "What? I thought you meant to take it." "Why?" "Because it's heavy." "So am I." She looked at him. Zeke took the opposite side. Together, they carried it across the barn. Something about that one word stayed with her all afternoon. A week later, his roan caught a hoof between 2 frozen roots near the paddock. Judith expected Zeke to wrench the animal free. Instead, the big cowboy went down on one knee in the snow. "Easy, boy." For nearly an hour he worked slowly, calming the horse before moving the trapped leg. Judith stood nearby holding the reins. She watched those rough hands move with extraordinary patience. When the horse finally stepped free, Zeke rubbed its neck. Only then did he notice Judith watching him. "What?" "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The first heavy storm arrived in early December and held them inside most of 2 days. Judith kneaded bread while Zeke repaired harness beside the stove. Wind pressed snow against the windows. "Your mother teach you that?" he asked. Judith looked down at the dough. Everything worth knowing in a kitchen. "She sounds formidable." She was. A pause. "She used to say I'd run a household better than any woman in the valley someday." Judith gave a small, humorless laugh. She was wrong. Zeke looked around. At the bread rising near the stove. At the jars Judith had reorganized. At the repaired curtain keeping cold from the window. At the neat stack of provisions that would now last longer than he had planned. "Was she?" Judith's hands stopped in the flour. Neither spoke again for a while. Days later, She cut her palm while splitting kindling. Zeke took her hand near the lamp and wrapped it with clean cloth. His fingers lingered for half a heartbeat. Then he released her. That night, Judith lay awake wondering why she wished he hadn't. Near Christmas, she finally asked the question that had followed her up the mountain. If I decided tomorrow that I wanted to leave, what would happen? Zeke looked up from his coffee. If the trail's safe, I take you. And if it isn't, I wait until it is. That's all? That's all. Judith went to her room. For several minutes, she left the door open. Then came Zeke's supply trip. He returned after dark with coffee, salt, lamp oil, flour, cartridges, and a look Judith had never seen on him before. He said little through supper. Later, she found him at the table cleaning his rifle. Something happened. His hands stopped. He did not lie. The trading post keeper said a stranger came through asking questions. Judith sat slowly. What kind? A woman from the Amish settlement. Black, 28 or thereabouts, traveling with a mountain man. The cabin suddenly seemed less warm. From the settlement? Zeke looked toward the dark window. I don't think so. A sound came from beyond the cabin. Crack, a branch beneath something heavier than snow. Zeke extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. Judith heard the small sounds first, the stove settling, the dogs shifting near the door, Zeke's boots moving once across the floorboards. Then nothing. He stood beside the window without touching the curtain. Judith stayed near the table, hands flat against the wood. Another sound came from outside. Not close this time. A horse moving through frozen brush, then fading toward the lower trail. Zeke waited nearly 10 minutes before striking a match. The lamp returned in a low yellow glow. Whoever it was, he said, they're gone. For tonight. His eyes met hers. For tonight. January closed the mountain soon after. Snow buried the lower trail until the fence posts looked half their usual height. For weeks, no rider came up from the valley, and no wagon could have gone down without a shovel crew ahead of it. Their world narrowed to the cabin, barn, cattle shelter, woodshed, and the white timber beyond. Strangely, Judith stopped feeling trapped. She began knowing Zeke by sound. The heavier floorboard near the stove creaked when he crossed it before dawn. His knife made a soft, scraping rhythm when he sharpened it. He cleared his throat once before saying something difficult. Zeke learned her habits too. He knew she was awake when the floorboard beside her bed gave a short complaint. He knew she hummed when dough was turning out well. He knew she stopped humming when memories had found her. One morning she discovered a sturdy work table against the wall near the east window. Fresh-cut pine, smooth top, the right height for sewing without bending her back. She ran her fingers along the edge. Zeke came in carrying kindling. You made this. You were ruining your shoulders at the dining table. That table has served you for years. So did my old roof. I fixed that too. Judith looked at him. Thank you. He nodded once and carried the wood to the stove. That evening she repaired the torn lining of his winter coat. Neither called either thing a gift. A few days later, Zeke carved her another wooden spoon. Judith held it up. This one could paddle a canoe. He stared at it, then laughed. Not the brief breath she had heard once or twice. A real laugh, low and surprised. Judith froze with the spoon in her hand. Zeke caught her staring. What? I had not heard that before. What? You. His smile faded into something quieter. Judith looked down before he could see what the sound had done to her. The old shame returned on wash day. She had tied a blanket across the warmest corner of the cabin and set a basin behind it. Later, dressed again, she stood before the small piece of polished metal Zeke used for shaving. She pulled at the waist of her dress, turned sideways, adjusted it again. Zeke entered from this barn, saw her expression, and immediately turned toward the door. Judith spoke before she could stop herself. Do you ever wish I were smaller? He stopped. The silence went on long enough that she regretted asking. Then Zeke turned back. He did not look at her body, only her face. I wish you'd stop expecting me to want somebody else. Judith's fingers loosened from the fabric. He left before she had to answer. That night she lay awake listening to the wind scrape snow from the roof. For once, the words following her into sleep were not the ones from the meeting house. Later that week, Judith asked why he had never married. Zeke sat near the hearth repairing a bridle. For a while he worked without speaking. There was someone once. Judith stayed still. Before this place was finished, we meant to make a life together. His thumb moved along the leather. She got sick before we did. I am sorry. So was I. There was no bitterness in it. Only an old room inside him opening for a moment. I kept working afterward, easier than expecting anything. Judith understood too well. I stopped expecting too. Zeke looked at her. You had people around you. That doesn't always keep a person from being alone. His eyes remained on hers a moment longer. No, he said. I suppose it doesn't. The first kiss came after a January storm tore part of the cattle shelter loose. They spent half the afternoon in blowing snow, holding boards steady while Zeke drove nails through frozen leather gloves. By the time they returned to the cabin both were exhausted. Judith stood near the stove while snow melted from Zeke's beard. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed it away. Her hand remained against his cheek. Neither moved. Zeke's voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. May I? Judith's heart struck once hard. Yes. He kissed her gently. No urgency, no claim. Just warmth after weeks of cold. When they separated, Judith stepped back. Zeke did not follow. He crossed to the stove and added another piece of wood. That restraint stayed with her longer than the kiss. Afterward, spring began frightening her. She found herself counting flour sacks, not to know how long she could survive there, to know how many weeks remained before the bargain ended. Stay until spring. Once those words had sounded like rescue. Now they sounded like a deadline. The rider came on a clear afternoon near the end of January. Zeke saw him first. His hand went automatically toward the rifle near the door. Judith stepped beside him. Then she recognized the horse. Samuel. He reached the cabin half frozen and too tired to hide it. Sister Martha had helped him copy papers from the settlement ledger before anyone could remove them. He laid them across Zeke's table. Receipts, charges, transportation, boarding, clothing, agent commission. Everything to be repaid through Judith's labor. Judith read each line slowly. Then she found the acknowledgement. A man's signature sat where hers should have been. Her face changed. I didn't sign this. Samuel said nothing. Judith knew the handwriting, one of the elders. She looked at him. Did they know what this meant? Samuel shifted in his chair. Some thought it was mission work. And the others? He looked toward the fire. Some didn't ask enough questions. Judith folded the papers. Once, then again. Placed them neatly on the table. She went outside. Snow covered the yard in clean, white silence. Zeke followed. His anger came faster than wisdom. You're never going back there. Judith turned. What? They don't get another chance at you. Her face went still. They decided Helena. She stepped toward him. Now you're deciding the mountain. Zeke's jaw tightened. Then he understood. You promised me a choice. Snow drifted between them. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his shoulders lowered. You're right. Judith had prepared herself for argument. The absence of one shook her more. Zeke continued. Tell me again what you want. She looked toward the valley hidden beyond the ridge. I stay through winter. He waited. When the roads open, I go back long enough to learn who signed those papers and why. Everything in Zeke's face said he hated the thought. His answer was simple. I'll take you. That night, Judith found him alone near the stove. If I choose not to come back, he took a long time, then I'll know you stayed because you wanted to while you were here. Judith looked down at his hand resting on the table, then placed hers over it. This time, she was the one who reached first. 3 days after Samuel left, Zeke found fresh tracks near the lower fence. Boot prints, a cut trail marker, horse manure too new to belong to any animal on the homestead. Someone had reached the mountain. Someone was waiting. That night, the dogs began to growl. Zeke woke immediately. Judith came from her room wearing her shawl. Outside, a lantern moved between the pines. Then another. Then a third. A man's voice carried through the dark. "Thorn, we know the woman is inside." Judith's hand closed around Zeke's arm. He looked once at her, then toward the locked door. His answer came low and steady. "Then you already know you're at the wrong house." Wind pressed snow against the cabin walls. For a few seconds, nothing came back. Then the man outside called, "We're acting on behalf of the Helena placement contractor." Zeke's hand remained near the rifle. Judith stepped closer to the door. "What do you want?" A pause. Then, "Judith Yoder owes transportation, lodging, placement fees, and lost labor. We're here to take her down the mountain." Judith's face hardened. Zeke opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. 3 men stood beyond the porch, heavy coats crusted with snow, horses tied farther back among the pines. The leader held folded papers. Zeke said, "Breach of what?" The man lifted the documents. "Her agreement." Judith moved into view. The leader immediately turned back toward Zeke. "She doesn't need to concern herself with the details." Judith's voice cut through the wind. "You're talking about me. Look at me." He did. Reluctantly. She held out her hand. "Give me the papers." He hesitated, then passed them through the opening. Judith carried them to the lamp. The first page listed charges: travel, boarding, clothing, commission, penalties. The second contained a witness acknowledgement. Judith read it twice, then looked up. "That isn't my name." The room changed. One of the hired men glanced toward the leader. Judith tapped the page. "I never signed this." The leader's jaw tightened. "You were placed under lawful arrangement." "By whom?" No answer. Judith stepped nearer the door. "If the arrangement was lawful, why do you need me brought to Helena before the papers are complete?" The third man shifted uncomfortably. The leader snapped, "Because we were paid to bring you. Not serve notice, not collect money. Bring her." Zeke's expression went flat. "Then leave." The leader did not. One of the other men pushed toward the porch. Zeke drove the door shut before he could force through. The first gunshot shattered the window beside the stove. Glass struck the floor. The dogs erupted into barking. Snow blew through the broken frame. Judith dropped behind the stone hearth as Zeke dragged the table sideways for cover. "Stay low." Another shot struck wood outside. Judith heard the horses in the barn kicking against their stalls. Zeke took the spare rifle from above the mantel and handed it to her. His voice stayed calm. "You remember what I showed you?" She nodded. "Don't fire unless you know what you're aiming at." Her fingers tightened around the stock. Then Zeke looked toward the rear window. A dull orange flicker moved near the barn. Someone had lantern light too close to the hay. His face changed. "If they set that barn, we lose the horses and most of the winter feed." Judith caught his sleeve. "No. I have to move. They're waiting for you." "Probably." "Zeke." He looked at her. For one moment the room seemed to hold still despite the wind. He touched his forehead to hers. "Stay behind stone." Then he was gone through the back door. Judith listened. One shot, Then another, a man's shout, a third shot farther away. Then nothing. The dogs paced and whined. Judith waited. She counted breaths. 10, 20, 30. Zeke? No answer. She looked toward the small room he had given her the first night. The door, the latch, the key. Everything he had built around one promise. You can leave if you choose. You can stay if you choose. You will never be trapped here. Judith rose. She pulled on her heavy coat, wrapped the wool shawl tight, forced her feet into winter boots, and took the rifle. The lantern stayed burning in the window, a point of return. Then she stepped into the storm. Snow struck her face hard enough to make her turn away. She followed the fence line first, exactly as Zeke had taught her. Then the shallow ditch beside the corral. Then the red-marked pine near the rock outcrop. She did not wander. She knew this place now. Halfway to the timber, she slipped and went down on one knee. For one long second, she stayed there, breath burning. Then she heard a shout. She stood. Near a fallen pine, shapes moved through the snow. Zeke was there. One man had him pinned behind the timber, while another circled wide. His rifle lay several yards away. Judith raised hers. The wind made a clean shot impossible. So she aimed into open snow near the advancing man's boots and fired. The blast stopped everyone. "Drop it!" The man turned. Zeke looked toward her, relief and disbelief crossing his face at once. The leader shouted, "Take her!" But the third hired man did not move. "I was told she signed." The leader rounded on him. "You were told to do a job." "She didn't sign." "That doesn't matter. It matters to me." The hesitation broke the whole confrontation open. Zeke surged forward and knocked the leader off balance. The second man rushed toward Judith. She swung the rifle stock, striking his weapon aside before he could reach her. The third man grabbed him from behind. Within moments, the fight was over. No triumph, just hard breathing, snow. 3 men on their knees with their weapons kicked away. Judith went straight to Zeke. Blood marked one side of his forehead, but he was standing. Barely. He stared at her. "What are you doing out here?" "Finding you." For half a second, it looked as though he might laugh. Then his knees softened. Judith got his arm over her shoulders. "Come on." He leaned part of his weight against her. The walk back was slow. The woman once described as too difficult for a household now carried a mountain cowboy home through the storm. Inside, Judith sat Zeke near the stove. She cleaned the cut at his temple with warm water and folded cloth. "You could have been killed," he said. Judith kept working. "So could you." He had no answer to that. The surrendered man waited until the wind eased enough to be heard through the barn wall. His name was Cal Mercer. He produced a leather packet from inside his coat. "Belonged to the Helena agent." Judith opened it at the kitchen table. Inside were ledger references, a payment receipt, a draft labor contract, then a letter. She read it slowly. "Bring the woman to Helena. Obtain her mark or signature afterward. If questioned, state that she traveled voluntarily." Judith's hand went still. Another letter bore Bishop Stoltzfus's name. He had written asking for clarification. The Helena agent had answered with assurances that did not match the contract at all. Judith looked at Zeke. So he doubted it. Zeke said nothing, but he didn't stop it. No. The truth was worse because it was not simple. Some had been careless. Some had been frightened. Someone in Helena had been dishonest. And Judith had been the person expected to bear the cost. Later, after the 3 men were secured in the barn until weather allowed travel, Judith and Zeke sat beside the fire. For a long while they listened to the stove tick. Then Zeke said, "When you came here, I thought I was saving you." Judith looked at him. You gave me somewhere to stand." His eyes lowered to her hands. "And then you came into that storm and saved me. Judith's throat tightened. She rested her hand over his. "You're my family." Zeke looked up. She had never said it before. At dawn, the snow finally began to ease. Judith opened the door. The sky above the eastern ridge was pale and clear. Water slipped from one icicle and struck the porch rail. Once. Then again. Zeke came beside her. Neither spoke. Judith watched the drop fall. Spring was still weeks away, but it was coming, and for the first time since Zeke had told her to stay until spring, Judith wished winter might wait a little longer. March loosened the mountain one careful day at a time. Snow slid from the cabin roof in heavy sheets. Water began talking beneath the creek ice. The trail turned from white to brown, then to mud. Horses shed winter hair against the fence rails, and the first dull grass appeared on the southern slope. Judith noticed every sign. So did Zeke. Neither mentioned the bargain. One morning she found him beside the wagon with a grease tin open on the ground. He had one wheel raised. The harness lay across a sawhorse, newly mended. 2 wool blankets were folded behind the seat. Judith stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Zeke did not look up. "Road'll open soon." The answer hurt more than it should have. He had promised. That was the problem. By the first week of April, the lower trail was passable. Judith packed slowly. She touched the work table he had made, the wooden spoon that was still too large, the door latch, the hearthstone. Her hand rested on the back of Zeke's chair before she finally turned away. They left the mountain just after sunrise. The journey down mirrored the one months earlier. Then Judith had stared ahead, because she did not know where the road ended. Now she looked backward more than once. By afternoon, the settlement appeared in the valley. People noticed the wagon immediately. Sister Martha came out first. She crossed the yard without caring who watched and wrapped Judith in both arms. Samuel stood near the smithy. Bishop Stoltzfus waited beside the meeting house. Judith looked at the building. "Let's finish it." Zeke stayed beside her but did not lead. Inside, the same table stood where it had in November. The same clock ticked. The same elders sat beneath the same plain windows. Only Judith had changed. She laid the Helena papers on the table 1 page at a time. Payment receipt, ledger entry, draft contract. The letter instructing the agent's men to obtain her signature after bringing her to Helena. Then she'd placed the witness acknowledgement down. Who signed this? One elder looked away. Another said he believed Bishop Stoltzfus had already spoken with her. A third admitted he had assumed the work was charitable. Judith waited. Finally, one man said quietly, "We believed sending you would settle a difficult matter." The room went still. Judith looked at him. "I was never the matter you were settling." No one moved. Bishop Stoltzfus removed his spectacles. "I wrote to Helena after the preliminary agreement. I asked for clarification." "I know." His eyes lifted. The man reassured me. "I should have stopped everything until I had proof." "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" His answer came slowly. "Because you had already gone with Mr. Thorne." Judith understood. Once she was gone, urgency disappeared. So did responsibility. Bishop Stoltzfus lowered his head. "I failed you." Judith looked around the room where other people had once spoken about her life as if she were absent. Then remember that failure the next time someone quiet stands in this room. She left without waiting for forgiveness. Over the following day, records from her parents' household were brought out. There was no hidden fortune, no dramatic inheritance. There were simply things that had always been partly hers. Her father's tools, her mother's remaining household goods, money still owed from livestock sold after her father's death, a small share from stored grain. The breadboard had never left her. Neither had the seed packets. Those mattered most. Cal Mercer's statement and the Helena documents were sent with a constable toward the county seat, once the southern road cleared. What happened afterward belonged to territorial authorities. Judith did not need to watch every dishonest man receive his consequence. She needed to decide what came next. That evening, she slept in her parents' farmhouse. Zeke stayed elsewhere. He said only, "You ought to have one night without anybody waiting on your answer." At dawn, Judith woke to wagon tracks. His were already leaving town. She stood on the porch, staring at them. For one terrible moment, she could not breathe. Sister Martha came through the gate carrying coffee. He left before sunrise. Judith looked at her. "He said you'd earned the right to decide without him standing there looking at you." Judith turned toward the house. Her mother's kitchen, her father's barn, the field beyond the fence, the cemetery under bare cottonwoods. Everything she had mourned was still here. But memory and home were not the same thing. She went to the stable, saddled a horse herself. Sister Martha watched from the doorway. "Where are you going?" Judith tightened the cinch. "Home." The ride north took most of the day. This time no wagon carried her. No man showed her the way. She knew the creek crossing, the red cuts on the pines, the shelf trail above the ravine, the place where snow lingered longest in shadow. By late afternoon, the thorn cabin appeared between the trees. Zeke was unloading supplies near the porch. He looked up, then went completely still. "Something wrong?" Judith swung down from the saddle. "Yes." His expression changed at once. "What? You left without me." Zeke stared at her. Then something in his face settled. Spring came. There it was, the bargain. "You have your land back," he said. "Some of it. Your people. Some of them." He looked toward the valley. I won't ask you to give up what you finally got back." Judith stepped closer. "What if I don't think I'm giving anything up?" His eyes returned to hers. She took his rough hand. "You told me to stay until spring." "I did. And now it's spring." Zeke nodded. His jaw tightened. Judith's voice dropped. "What if I want forever?" For several seconds only, the mountain answered. Wind moved through thawing pine branches. A horse shifted at the rail. Water struck the edge of the porch roof in slow drops. Zeke looked at her, as if afraid to understand too quickly. "Judith Yoder," he said, "are you choosing this mountain?" A small smile touched her mouth. "I'm choosing the man standing on it." He closed his eyes once, then opened them. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." The wedding came several weeks later beneath a clear spring sky. Sister Martha stood near Judith. Samuel came up from the valley. A few ranch hands Zeke knew through trading rode in before noon. Even Bishop Stoltzfus appeared quietly at the edge of the gathering. He said little. For once, silence was appropriate. Afterward, life did not become easier because they had married. There were fences to mend, calves to watch, mud everywhere, tools breaking at inconvenient times, but the work belonged to both of them. One afternoon, Judith knelt below the cabin planting seeds her mother had saved years before. Zeke dug the rows. Judith emptied another packet. He looked over. "That's enough beans." Judith slowly lifted her head. Zeke looked at the remaining garden, then at her. "Maybe one more row." She laughed. That evening, Judith stood on the porch while the last light faded across the Montana peaks. Inside, 2 plates dried beside the wash basin. 2 coats hung on pegs. Her mother's breadboard rested beside Zeke's oversized carved spoon. Snow still crowned the highest mountains. Zeke came out and stood beside her. Judith did not shift away to make room. He did not step in front of her. Shoulder to shoulder, they watched the valley darken. Winter had once brought her there because every other road seemed closed. Spring opened them all, and only then, when Judith was free to go anywhere, did she know exactly where she wanted to stay. Maybe that is what makes her choice matter. She didn't remain on that mountain because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed after the road was clear, after her name and property had been returned to her, and after Zeke had kept the hardest promise a man in love can keep. He opened his hand and let her choose. Imagine standing where Judith stood that spring. Behind you is the life you spent years trying to hold on to. Ahead is something uncertain, built not from obligation, but from trust. Which road would you take? Some people enter our lives to rescue us. Others do something quieter. They remind us that we were capable of standing all along. Zeke gave Judith a safe place through one hard winter. But Judith gave him something too. A reason to believe that grief did not have to be the final chapter of his life. Perhaps that's what lasting love looks like. Not possession, not repayment. Two people carrying the weight together and still leaving each other free enough to say, I choose you. If Judith's journey stayed with you, tell me in the comments, would you have returned to the mountain? And if you'd like to sit with us for another story of courage, mystery, healing, and unexpected love, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There's another road waiting just beyond the next ridge.